The evening sky was painted in shades of orange and gold when Officer Armin returned from his duty. His loyal dog Bruno ran to him wagging his tail with joy. Bruno was a German shepherd, strong and intelligent, trained to help Armin during missions. They were more than partners, they were like brothers. Wherever Armin went, Bruno followed. That day had been long and tiring. Armin had just finished a rescue mission on the city border, where a building had caught fire. He helped pull several people out and went back in even when the flames were still high. He came home coughing, trying to act fine. His wife Amina saw that he looked pale. She asked him to rest, but Armin smiled and said he was all right. Bruno stayed beside his bed that night. The dog seemed uneasy. He made low sounds as if trying to warn Armin, but Armin patted his head and whispered that everything would be fine. The house became quiet. Only Bruno's soft breathing filled the air. By morning, Armin felt weak. His chest hurt when he tried to stand. Amina called the city hospital. Within minutes, an ambulance arrived. Bruno followed them, barking loudly, not wanting to be left behind. At the hospital gate, the guards stopped the dog. Bruno sat near the entrance, refusing to move away. His eyes stayed fixed on the doors where Armin had gone in. Inside, the doctors gathered around the officer. They did several tests. One of the senior doctors, Dr. Rahim, shook his head and said the case was strange. Armin had a high fever, chest pain, and a weak heartbeat. They thought it might be a lung infection caused by smoke. They gave him oxygen and medicine, but his condition did not improve. Bruno, outside the hospital, refused food and water. He kept watching every person entering and leaving, waiting for his master. A few nurses tried to move him, but he growled softly and stayed put. He seemed to sense that something was wrong. 2 days passed. Armin's condition grew worse. The doctors could not understand what was happening. They called for more experts. Soon there were almost 50 doctors who checked his reports. They all gave different opinions. Some said it was a rare infection. Some said it might be poison from the smoke. Others said his heart was too weak. Each tried his best, but no one found the real cause. Amina cried outside the ICU. She prayed for a miracle. She saw Bruno still sitting by the main gate. She walked out and hugged him. The dog looked at her with eyes full of understanding. It was as if he wanted to tell her something. He sniffed her clothes and started pulling her hand toward the parking area. She followed him, not knowing why. Bruno ran straight to Armin's car. He started barking near the back seat. Amina opened the door. Bruno jumped inside and began sniffing every corner. Suddenly he stopped at the floor mat. He scratched it hard until a small metallic needle rolled out. Amina looked at it with surprise. It was small and thin, almost invisible. She picked it up with a tissue. She remembered that Armin had been treating people in the burning building before he fell sick. Maybe that needle had stuck in his clothes or skin by mistake. She quickly took it to the hospital and gave it to Dr. Rahim. The doctor examined it carefully. He realized it was not an ordinary needle, but one used for tranquilizer darts. That type was used by animal control teams, not in hospitals. Dr. Rahim felt a sudden chill. He called the police department to check if any such darts were missing. Within an hour, a report came that one dart had gone missing from a storehouse near the fire site. That meant Armin might have been hit by that dart during the chaos, and the tranquilizer could still be in his blood. The doctors started new tests. They found traces of the tranquilizer in Armin's system. It was a rare kind that slowed the heart and stopped breathing if untreated. They immediately started giving the right antidote. For the first time in days, Armin's heart rate improved. The doctors were shocked and amazed. Amina stood outside, praying silently. When Dr. Rahim came out smiling, she knew that hope had returned. Bruno was still sitting near the gate, his ears rising when he saw the doctor. Dr. Rahim walked out and patted the dog's head. He said the words that brought tears to Amina's eyes. It was this dog who found what 50 doctors missed, he said. Amina knelt beside Bruno and hugged him tightly. She realized how deep a bond there was between Armin and his dog. Bruno barked once as if telling her that his job was not over yet. That night, Armin's condition became stable. The hospital staff admired Bruno. They allowed him to come inside for a few minutes. The moment Bruno entered the ICU, Armin's eyes moved. His fingers twitched slightly. He could feel his friend nearby. Everyone stood still watching this quiet moment between man and dog. The doctors, who had tried everything, now understood that loyalty and love could sometimes achieve what even science could not. Dr. Rahim decided to keep Bruno near Armin, until he fully recovered. He said that the dog had done more than any machine or medicine. Amina thanked the doctor and then looked at Bruno, who was now lying beside Armin's bed, calm and watchful. Outside, the city lights flickered. The story of the loyal dog and the dying officer began to spread among the nurses and guards. They whispered about how a simple dog had done what 50 doctors could not, but for Bruno it was not about fame. It was about protecting his master, the man who had saved many lives and never ignored his friend. The next morning, Armin opened his eyes fully for the first time in a week. His voice was weak but clear. The first word he spoke was Bruno's name. The dog jumped with joy and wagged his tail. The room filled with smiles and relief. Dr. Rahim came in and said that Arman would recover soon. He told everyone how Bruno had led them to the truth. The hospital director later said that the dog would be given a medal for bravery, but Bruno only cared about one thing: staying close to Arman. He followed every movement, watching him breathe and rest. His eyes stayed full of loyalty. The doctors learned a big lesson from this event. Sometimes answers come not from complex tests but from paying attention to small signs, and in this case it was a loyal heart that guided them. As night came again, Bruno rested near Armin's bed. The machines beeped softly, showing signs of healing. The long struggle was not over yet, but the hope had returned, and everyone in the hospital knew one thing very clearly now. When all else failed, it was a loyal dog who found what everyone had missed. Arman slowly opened his eyes. The bright hospital lights hurt at first, but when he saw the familiar face of his wife, Amina, and the warm brown eyes of Bruno beside his bed, a weak smile formed on his lips. He could not speak much, but his eyes said everything. Bruno barked softly, his tail wagging in small circles as if to say that everything would be fine now. The doctors were relieved to see him awake. Dr. Rahim came closer and checked his pulse. He told Amina that Arman was out of danger but still needed rest. The poison from the tranquilizer was leaving his system, but his lungs were still weak from smoke and the dart. It would take time for him to walk again, and he needed care. Amina thanked every doctor, but deep down, she knew that the real hero of this story was Bruno. The dog had saved Arman's life by finding the clue everyone missed. From that day, the hospital staff treated Bruno with love and respect. They even made a small resting place for him near Arman's room. Nurses brought him food and water, and children from nearby wards came to play with him. Arman's recovery was slow but steady. Every morning, Bruno waited for the nurse to open the door. As soon as he entered the room, Arman's face would brighten. The doctors noticed that his heartbeat became stronger whenever Bruno was around. They began to allow the dog to stay inside longer. A week later, Arman could finally sit up. His voice was still weak, but he could talk. He asked Amina to tell him what had happened. She explained everything: how Bruno found the needle, how Dr. Rahim discovered the poison, and how the doctors worked together to save him. Arman listened in silence. When she finished, he looked at Bruno with tears in his eyes. "You saved me again, my friend," Arman whispered. Bruno barked once, as if replying, "Always." Days passed peacefully, but one evening, Dr. Rahim came with a serious face. He said that the tranquilizer found in Arman's body was not an ordinary type. It was made in a secret lab, one that was not supposed to exist. Someone had used it during the rescue mission on purpose. That meant the fire and the dart might have been part of something bigger. Arman was shocked. He could not believe someone would try to harm him. He had always been careful during missions, but this time someone had planned it. Dr. Rahim said he had informed the police, and they had started an investigation. Arman wanted to help, but his body was still weak. When the police came to take his statement, Arman told them everything he remembered. He said he had seen a man in a dark uniform during the fire who was not part of the rescue team. That man had a small metal tube in his hand. Arman thought it was some tool, but now it made sense that it was the dart gun. Bruno, lying near the bed, growled softly when Arman mentioned the unknown man. It was as if he remembered the same scent. The police took note of everything and promised to find the truth. The next few days brought new tension. Late at night, Bruno became restless. He would suddenly wake up, sniff the air, and look toward the window. Amina thought he was reacting to the hospital noises, but Bruno's instincts were never wrong. One night, a nurse on duty saw a shadow near the hospital store area. She called security, but by the time they arrived, the person was gone. However, a small piece of dark fabric was found near the back gate. It matched the uniform of the unknown man Armand had described. The police increased security around the hospital. They believed that whoever tried to harm Armand might come again. Armand was an important officer and had worked on many sensitive missions. Perhaps he had enemies who wanted him gone. The next morning, Dr. Rahim came to Armand's room and told him not to worry. He said they would transfer him to a more secure facility once he was strong enough. Armand nodded, but Bruno kept watching the door, his ears always alert. That evening, as Amina was preparing to go home for a short rest, Bruno suddenly stood up and started barking toward the corridor. His bark was loud and sharp, different from his normal bark. The nurse rushed in and Armand tried to sit up. Bruno ran out of the room, following a faint scent. The corridor was dimly lit, and a figure dressed in hospital clothes was walking away fast. Bruno chased him down the hallway. The man turned back and ran toward the fire exit. Bruno leapt forward, catching the man's sleeve in his teeth. The man tried to pull away, but Bruno's grip was strong. The noise drew guards and nurses. When they caught the man, they found a small device in his pocket, shaped like a syringe. The police arrived within minutes. They discovered that the man was pretending to be a cleaner, but was actually part of a gang that wanted to silence Armand. The tranquilizer had been made by them, and Armand had been their target because he knew about their illegal activities during rescue operations. The officers thanked Bruno for his bravery. They said that without him, the man might have escaped. Armand felt proud of his loyal dog. Bruno had once again proved his sharp mind and courage. After the incident, the hospital became a safe place again. The police kept a guard near Armand's room day and night. Dr. Rahim told Amina that Armand's condition was improving faster now. He would be able to go home soon. The day came when Armand finally left the hospital. All the doctors and nurses came to say goodbye. Bruno walked beside him, his chest high and his steps proud. The hospital staff cheered for the brave dog who had saved a life and helped catch a criminal. Back home, the atmosphere was warm and peaceful. Amina cooked Armand's favorite meal. Bruno got a big bowl of meat and biscuits as a reward. The neighborhood children came to see them and hear the story of how Bruno saved his master. But even though things looked calm, Armand knew the story was not over. The man caught in the hospital was only one part of a bigger network. The real leader was still free. Armand decided that once he fully recovered, he would find the truth and end it. Bruno seemed to understand his thoughts. That night he sat near the window looking at the moon. His ears twitched at every sound. He was always ready, always guarding his family. Armand looked at him and smiled. "You and I, Bruno, we still have work to do," he said softly. Bruno wagged his tail and lay down near the bed, his eyes watching the door as if guarding his master from the shadows. Outside, the wind blew gently through the trees. Inside, the bond between man and dog grew stronger. They had faced death together and survived. Now they were ready to face whatever would come next. The story of the officer and his loyal dog spread through the city. People called Bruno a hero, and many said he had a heart that saw what even human eyes could not. But for Armand and Amina, he was more than a hero. He was family. As the night deepened, peace filled the house. Yet somewhere far away, a man in a dark coat was reading the newspaper headline about Armand's recovery. His eyes were cold. He whispered to himself that the story was not over yet. And miles away, Bruno suddenly lifted his head as if he could sense a storm coming again. The sun was bright and the sky clear when Armand finally returned to duty after a month of rest. His strength had come back slowly, but his spirit had never faded. He walked into the police base with Bruno beside him. Every officer saluted him with respect. They all knew the story of how Bruno saved his life and helped catch the criminal in the hospital. The base commander welcomed him back warmly. He said the department had decided to give Bruno a special medal for bravery. A small ceremony was held in the main hall. Bruno stood proudly as the medal was placed around his neck. Everyone clapped and Armand smiled with pride. Bruno barked once, almost as if he understood the honor he had received. After the ceremony, Armand met his old team. They were happy to have him back, but there was still worry in the air. The man caught in the hospital had revealed very little information. He only said he was working for someone powerful who controlled illegal chemical trade. The police believed that person might still be planning something dangerous. Armand listened carefully to the reports. He had not forgotten the dart that nearly killed him. He wanted to know who was behind it. The commander allowed him to join the investigation team again, but only for light duty until he was fully fit. Bruno was also given permission to join missions since his skills were unmatched. Over the next few days, Armin studied old files and maps. He found that all the strange incidents, the fire, the stolen tranquilizer, and even the hospital intruder, were connected to one name. A man known only as Malik. He was a former scientist who had once worked on animal tranquilizers for rescue operations, but later started making illegal versions for black market use. No one had seen him for years, but his network was active. One evening, Armand sat in his office with Bruno resting near his chair. He looked at the reports and whispered that he would find Malik no matter what it took. Bruno raised his head as if agreeing. Suddenly, the communication line buzzed. A young officer reported that a warehouse outside the city had been found with traces of the same tranquilizer. Armand stood up at once. He requested permission to visit the site. The commander agreed but told him to be careful. As the team prepared, Bruno barked eagerly. He knew something important was about to happen. When they reached the warehouse, the air was dusty and cold. The place looked abandoned, but the smell of chemicals was strong. Armand and Bruno entered with flashlights while the team covered the sides. Bruno sniffed around and started moving toward the back section. He stopped near a stack of wooden boxes and growled. Armand signaled the team. They opened the boxes and found bottles, vials, and metal tubes similar to the dart found in Armand's car. Among them was a file with symbols that looked like lab marks. It had the name of a nearby village written on it. Before they could leave, Bruno barked loudly again. Armand turned just in time to see a shadow moving above them. Someone was hiding in the ceiling beams. The figure dropped down and ran toward the exit. Armand chased him with Bruno sprinting ahead. The man jumped into a truck parked outside and started the engine. Bruno leapt onto the side of the truck, trying to pull him down. The truck swerved, almost hitting a wall. Armand ran close behind and fired at the tires. The truck stopped and the man jumped out. Bruno caught his sleeve, dragging him to the ground. The team surrounded him. He turned out to be Malik's assistant. They took him in for questioning. At the station, he refused to talk at first, but after hours of questioning, he revealed that Malik was hiding in a laboratory near the old river road, far from the city. He said Malik was planning to test a new chemical formula that could harm anyone who inhaled it. Armand knew they had to act fast. He asked permission from the commander to lead the mission himself. The commander agreed but warned him to stay alert. Bruno would go with him. The team prepared silently through the night. By dawn, they reached the area near the river road. The lab was hidden behind trees and looked like an old factory. The air was heavy with a strange smell. Armand put on his mask and motioned for his men to move in. Bruno was beside him, his ears straight, ready for action. As they entered the building, the floor creaked under their boots. Machines and tubes filled the room. There were bottles and boxes everywhere. Suddenly, a door opened from the upper floor and Malik appeared. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp. He said in a cold voice that Armand should have stayed in the hospital. He laughed and pressed a button on a remote. At once, gas started to fill the room. The officers rushed to put on masks. Armand shouted for everyone to move out, but Bruno ran toward Malik, barking fiercely. The scientist tried to escape through the back door, but Bruno blocked his path. Armand followed quickly and caught Malik before he could run farther. A short struggle followed, but Bruno's growl made Malik freeze. The team shut down the gas release and cleared the area. Malik was arrested and the chemicals were taken safely. Armand took off his mask and looked at the building filled with strange bottles and machines. He realized how close the city had been to danger. When they returned to the base, everyone congratulated the team. The commander said that Armand and Bruno had saved many lives. Reporters came to cover the story. They took photos of Bruno wearing his medal and sitting proudly beside Armand. The story of the brave officer and his loyal dog spread once again across the country. That night, after all the noise and lights were gone, Armand sat outside his house with Bruno. The sky was clear and stars shone brightly. Amina brought tea and smiled. She said the world now knew what she already knew, that Bruno was more than a pet, he was a hero. Armand patted Bruno's head and said that he was lucky to have him, but Bruno, even in peace, stayed alert. His ears moved at every sound. He looked toward the road as if still watching for danger. Armand noticed and said softly that it was finally over. Yet deep inside he also felt a strange unease. He wondered if there were more people like Malik still out there, waiting for a chance to cause harm. For now, though, the night was calm. The sound of crickets filled the air. Bruno lay beside Armand's chair, his eyes slowly closing but his mind awake. He had protected his master through danger and mystery, and he was ready to do it again whenever needed. The city slept peacefully that night, unaware of how close it had come to disaster. Only a few people knew the full truth, that the bond between a man and his loyal dog had once again saved countless lives. As the moon rose higher, Bruno opened his eyes for a moment, glanced at Armand, and then rested his head again. His duty was never over, but for now his master was safe, and that was all that mattered. Weeks passed since Malik's arrest, and peace returned to the city. Officer Armand received praise from every department, but he always said the true credit belonged to Bruno. The dog had saved his life and helped capture the criminal. Newspapers printed Bruno's picture with the headline, "The dog who outsmarted 50 doctors and a mastermind." Armand returned to his daily duties, though this time he worked in intelligence. His new job was to review data from old cases and find links that others might have missed. He liked the quiet work, and Bruno stayed near his desk each day. The bond between them grew stronger. Wherever Armand went, Bruno followed without needing any command. One morning, Armand was going through Malik's old files. He found a document that looked out of place. It mentioned something called Project Silver Mist. It was written in Malik's handwriting, but there was no detail except one strange line. Testing moved to Zone 9. Armand did not know what Zone 9 meant. He showed the paper to the commander, who frowned and said that Zone 9 was an old army base that had been closed for years. The commander ordered a small team to visit the site quietly. Armand was asked to lead them because he had worked on the Malik case. Bruno was included as part of the operation. They started their journey that same afternoon. The road to the old base was long and rough. Trees and thick bushes covered most of the path. When they reached the gate, the place looked abandoned. Rusted trucks stood in the yard and broken windows covered the buildings. But Bruno started sniffing the air and growled softly. Armand knew that meant someone had been there recently. He told his team to stay alert. They moved carefully inside. The main building had several rooms filled with old files and broken furniture. Yet one room had lights working and a generator running in the corner. That was strange because the base had no power supply. Armand entered slowly, his gun raised. Inside the room, they found boxes labeled with chemical signs and a computer still turned on. The screen showed test data and codes related to gas and tranquilizer mixtures. Bruno barked once and ran toward a back door. Armand followed. Behind the building, a small van was parked. It was loaded with cylinders marked with a silver line. Before they could check, a man in a gray coat appeared from behind the van. He looked older than Malik, but carried the same calm expression. He raised his hands slowly and said, "I suppose Malik talked too much before you caught him." Armand pointed his weapon and asked who he was. The man replied that he was Dr. Salim, Malik's mentor. He said Malik had failed his project, but he would finish it himself. Armand told him that his experiments were dangerous and had already hurt many people. But Salim smiled coldly and said that his work would change the future of medicine if people could understand it. Before Armand could move closer, Salim pressed a switch. Smoke started to rise from the ground near the van. Bruno barked loudly, warning Armand. The team moved back quickly and one officer threw a wet cloth over the leaking cylinder. The smoke cleared, but Salim had vanished into the forest behind the base. Armand called for backup and ordered his team to chase him. Bruno led the way, his nose low to the ground. The forest was thick and dark, but Bruno never lost the scent. After running for almost half an hour, they reached an old watchtower. The door was open, and faint light came from inside. Bruno entered first, sniffing the corners. Suddenly, he stopped near a stairway and barked. Armand followed and found a small lab set up inside. There were glass bottles, notes, and a locked box. On the table lay a piece of paper with the word "Silver Mist Launch" written at the top. The date on it was the next day. Before Armand could read more, Bruno turned sharply toward the window and growled. A shadow moved outside. Salim tried to escape again, but this time Armin was ready. He jumped down the steps and ran after him. The chase went through the thick woods. Bruno stayed close, fast and determined. Salim tried to throw a small device that released a white smoke, but Bruno avoided it and leapt forward, catching his coat. The scientist fell hard, and the team surrounded him. They took Salim back to the base for questioning. The commander was informed immediately. During the interrogation, Salim admitted that silver mist was a new gas experiment he had designed. He wanted to test it in a crowded place to see how long it could knock people unconscious. He claimed it was not meant to kill but could easily do so if used wrongly. Arman was shocked at his words. The next day's plan could have caused a disaster in the city. The police destroyed all the gas cylinders and sealed the entire base. Salim was handed over to higher authorities for further trial. When the team returned home, everyone praised Arman again. But Arman said that once more, it was Bruno who saved the day. If Bruno had not noticed the gas leak or followed the scent through the forest, Salim might have escaped and the city could have faced great danger. At home that evening, Amina greeted them with relief. She had heard the news on television. She hugged Bruno tightly and gave him a new collar as a gift. Armin laughed and said that Bruno deserved a whole box of rewards. Bruno wagged his tail happily and ran around the living room, proud and joyful. Later that night, as the family sat together, Armin thought about everything that had happened since the day he almost died. First the tranquilizer dart, then the hospital attack, and now the hidden lab. It felt like fate had tested him many times, but Bruno had always been his shield. He looked down at the dog lying near his feet. Bruno was sleeping lightly, his ears still twitching with every sound. Armin whispered softly that he owed his life to him. Amina smiled and said that Bruno had a heart that understood more than words. The next morning, Armin received a message from the commander saying that the government had decided to honor Bruno and Armin together at a national ceremony. It would be held in the capital. Amina's eyes filled with tears of happiness when she heard it. She said their journey had been full of struggle but also full of blessings. When the day came, Armin wore his formal uniform, and Bruno wore his medal and new collar. The ceremony was grand. Officers, reporters, and citizens filled the hall. The minister praised Armin's courage and Bruno's loyalty. He said that the bond between man and dog was an example of true friendship and faith. As Bruno stood proudly beside Armin, the crowd cheered loudly. Cameras flashed, and children waved flags. For a moment, Armin closed his eyes and felt peace. He knew that all the pain, danger, and struggle had led to this moment. After the ceremony, Armin looked at Bruno and said that they had completed one mission. But life always brought new challenges. Bruno barked once as if agreeing. They both looked at the sunset beyond the tall buildings. The future was uncertain, but Armin knew one thing. As long as Bruno was by his side, he could face anything. The loyal dog had saved him more than once, and together, they had stopped evil plans from harming others. The wind blew softly across the field outside the hall. Bruno's medal shone under the golden light of the evening sun, a symbol of bravery, love, and the power of loyalty. That night, as stars filled the sky, Armin and Bruno walked together on the quiet road back home. Their steps were steady, their bond stronger than ever. They had become more than just officer and dog. They were heroes who had faced death, defeated darkness, and shown the world the meaning of true friendship. Months passed and life slowly returned to normal for Armin, Amina, and Bruno. The city was calm, the streets were safe, and the stories of the officer and his loyal dog were told in newspapers and on television. Bruno had become a symbol of courage, not just for officers, but for ordinary citizens as well. People stopped to greet him whenever he was on patrol with Armin. Children brought him treats, and neighbors often watched him play in the yard. Armin returned fully to his active duty. He worked on crime prevention and rescue operations. Bruno was always at his side, ready to alert him at the first sign of danger. Even though Armin had survived death once, he knew he could not afford to relax. There were always threats in the city, but he now had a partner he could completely trust. One afternoon, a distress call came from the edge of the city. A building under construction had caught fire, and several workers were trapped inside. Armin and his team arrived quickly. Smoke rose high into the sky, and the heat made it hard to see. Bruno barked sharply, signaling Armin to follow him. The dog's senses were sharper than any human's. Inside the building, flames blocked the usual exit. Armin spotted a worker on the upper floor waving frantically. Bruno led the way to a narrow staircase that had not yet collapsed. Armin followed carefully, holding his equipment tightly. The smoke was thick, but Bruno never faltered. He stayed ahead, checking every corner for danger. When they reached the trapped worker, the floor under them started to crack. Armin held the man while Bruno barked urgently, urging them to move back. Carefully, they made their way down, with Bruno checking the structure for weak spots. Once outside, the worker collapsed on the ground, coughing but alive. Firefighters arrived to handle the remaining flames. Armand patted Bruno on the head and whispered that he had saved another life. Bruno wagged his tail proudly but did not relax completely. He kept his eyes on the building until the fire was fully controlled. Armand smiled at him, knowing that the dog had a sense that went beyond normal instinct. That evening, back at home, Amina prepared a meal for Armand. Bruno sat near his feet, watching him eat, occasionally licking his hand for a small taste. Armand laughed and said that Bruno deserved a feast for his bravery. Amina agreed, saying that their lives had been protected many times by the dog's loyalty and courage. Days turned into weeks, and the trio settled into a routine. Armand trained with his team, worked on cases, and spent time with Amina. Bruno stayed by his side at all times, never leaving him alone. But one morning, Armand noticed that Bruno was restless. He paced near the door, sniffing the air, and growled softly. The dog's instincts had always been sharp, and Armand trusted them completely. Soon, a call came from the police intelligence office. A new threat had been detected. Someone was trying to steal chemicals from a closed laboratory on the outskirts of the city. The stolen chemicals could be dangerous if misused. Armand knew that time was critical. He immediately prepared his team, with Bruno ready to accompany him. At the laboratory, the gate was open and the place looked abandoned. Bruno sniffed the ground and growled, leading Armand to a small shed in the back. Inside, they found 3 men trying to pack boxes with vials of chemicals. The moment the intruders noticed Armand, they ran toward the forest. Bruno barked and chased them, while Armand followed closely. Bruno caught the first man's jacket and held him until the team arrived. The second man tried to climb a fence, but Bruno jumped and blocked his path. The third man ran deeper into the forest. Armand pursued him and found the man trapped near a small ravine. Bruno had cornered him from behind, making sure he could not escape. The team secured all 3 men and recovered the stolen chemicals. Armand checked every vial and ensured they were safely transported to the police lab. Once again, Bruno had proved that his loyalty and intelligence were unmatched. After returning home, Armand sat on the porch, tired but satisfied. Bruno lay next to him, panting lightly but alert. Amina joined them and hugged both of them. She said that she had never seen such courage in any human or animal. Armand smiled, saying that Bruno had saved his life and many others. He realized that the dog had become more than a companion. He was a protector and a true hero. One evening, as they watched the sunset, Armand thought about everything that had happened since the day he almost died. He remembered the hospital, the Dart, Malik, and Salim. Every challenge had been met with courage, and every time Bruno had been the key to survival. He looked at the dog and said softly that he owed him everything. Bruno responded with a gentle bark as if he understood. Armand laughed quietly and said that he hoped their life would now be peaceful. Bruno wagged his tail but kept his ears raised, always alert. He was ready for whatever the future held. A few weeks later, the city council decided to honor both Armand and Bruno officially. A ceremony was held in the city hall, attended by officials, officers, and citizens. The mayor praised Armand's courage and Bruno's loyalty. He said that the story of the officer and his dog was an example of true friendship and bravery for everyone. During the ceremony, children came forward to meet Bruno. They patted his head and listened to stories of how he had saved lives. Bruno remained calm, enjoying the attention but always watching Armand closely. When Armand gave him a gentle scratch behind his ears, Bruno wagged his tail happily. Back at home that evening, Amina looked at the 2 heroes sitting together and said that she felt safe knowing that no matter what happened, they would face it together. Armand nodded and smiled. He realized that true strength did not come from weapons or machines, but from loyalty, trust, and love. The days that followed were calm, but Armand remained vigilant. He trained his team and worked on community safety. Bruno accompanied him everywhere, alert and ready. Sometimes when Armin felt tired, he would simply sit and watch Bruno patrol the yard. The dog's presence gave him peace and confidence. One night, a soft rain began to fall. Armin, Amina, and Bruno sat near the window, watching the water glisten on the streets. Bruno rested his head on Armin's lap, his eyes calm but alert. Armin gently stroked his fur and whispered that he was lucky to have a friend like him. Amina smiled and said that they had all learned an important lesson. Life was unpredictable, but loyalty and courage could guide them through the darkest times. Bruno had shown them that. As the rain continued, Armin thought about the future. He knew that there could still be dangers, but with Bruno by his side, he felt ready. The dog had saved him from death, guided him through danger, and prevented disasters. Bruno had a heart that saw what humans sometimes could not. Bruno lifted his head and looked out the window at the wet streets. His ears twitched at every sound. He was ready to act, to protect, to serve. Armin smiled, knowing that together they could face any challenge. In the quiet night, the city slept peacefully. Inside their home, the officer and his loyal dog rested together. The bond between them was unbreakable, tested by danger and strengthened by trust. The story of Armin and Bruno had reached the hearts of many, but for them it was simply life. They had faced death, discovered truth, and shown the world the power of loyalty and love. And as long as they were together, they knew that they could overcome anything. Bruno curled up beside Armin, his metal shining under the soft light. The officer's hand rested on the dog's fur, and Amina leaned close, smiling. The night was calm, the home was safe, and for the first time in a long time, they felt truly at peace. And so, the loyal dog who had found what 50 doctors missed, who had saved his master from danger and guided the authorities to the truth, rested proudly. His work was done for now, but his vigilance and courage would never fade. Armin knew that with Bruno by his side, life would always be full of hope, bravery, and unwavering friendship.